chronologically, like I can directly introduce our next speaker, Mark Edward Hay from King's College London, who has written a dissertation, fantastic dissertation on the role of Dutch high finance in Napoleonic times. And he's going to speak to us about how the Napoleonist foreign trade. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you. So indeed, what I'd like to do today is to explore the historiographical legacy of Pieter Gehl for my field of study, which is revolutionary Napoleonic history. So for my title, Pieter Gehl, the Napoleonist, For and Against, you may make up that I intended to discuss his most acknowledged contribution to the field, also his monograph, Napoleon, For and Against. While preparing for this paper, however, I decided to explore Gehl's legacy in the broader sense, revolutionary and Napoleonic history. And there's three reasons for this. First is that I underestimated the sheer quantity of Gehl's outputs. Published immensely, and I simply wasn't aware of this. Second, the geographical focus of my research is on the Low Countries like Gehl, so I think it would be folly to ignore or disregard his contributions to Low Country history. And third, I think that by focusing on Gehl's broader contribution, I can make this paper more about Gehl than about my own research interests, which I believe is more in line with the spirit of this conference. So after Gehl passed away in 1966, the inventory was done of Gehl's research output. And I believe that were in the presence of his compiler. This was a great surprise to me, but they came to no less than 1,049 publications. So this is academic studies, critical essays, polemics, correspondence, book reviews, and sort of brief entries and newspaper editorials, a whole range of things. Naturally, his focus was mostly on Low Countries history, also with historiography, philosophy history, adventures into art history, literary criticism, and current affairs. The geographical focus was mostly on the Low Countries, but also its colonies, to a lesser extent France, Germany, Italy, Britain and its empire, the United States, and the European Union, its predecessor. As regards to its temporal boundaries, we explored affairs from the 16th century to the 20th century, so in the broadest sense. So all this considerable output published quite a bit in the revolutionary and Napoleonic era. Foremost amongst which for this course is of course his magnum opus, De Geschiedenis van de Nederlandse Stam, the history of the Dutch speaking peoples, which I suppose, or which I've understood to be his historical substantiation of his conception of the Greater Netherlands. Book 10, and in particular the third volume, deals with the latter 2 decades of the 18th century Dutch revolutionary history. So I will not discuss the historiographical legacy or the historiographical relevance of this work in particular, because I think that there's more articles which he published subsequently from which this can be noted better. I will make one point, and that is that the end point of Gehl's study is the year 1798. And this is the year in which radical Dutch revolutionaries introduced forcefully a constitution into the Netherlands. I think that from the perspective of revolutionary Napoleonic history, this is a very unfortunate or unsatisfactory endpoint. For the simple fact that we consider 1815, when Napoleon was definitively defeated, the endpoint of the era. But I think that for historians of the Low Countries, 1798 is also rather unsatisfying. I think that the years, the 30 odd years after 1798, they stand out for being, or for, I suppose, the historical experience of the North and the South becoming intertwined like never before. And so it's a shame that a historian of the Low Countries does not focus on this this crucial episode of our country's history. In his defense, he does consider his stunt to have been unfinished. I do believe that he wanted to have expanded it, maybe into the 1830s, but he simply did not have the time or didn't get around to it. So let me now just touch on one of the first topics he deals with, the Patriots. As we mentioned just briefly before, but I want to get into slightly more detail. His major publication in this field is a monograph. It's called the Debatgroepbeweging, the Patriot Movement. Well, this monograph is not based on original research, but is actually drawn from his stump, and largely Book 10 and Volume 3. It is a direct response to Kolenbranders' Patriotentijd, which was published half a century earlier. Kolenbrander considered the latter decades of the 18th century some of the darkest of Dutch history, in particular due to foreign interference in Dutch domestic affairs, British, Prussian, English. And this view is reflected in his treatment of the Patriot Revolution of the 1780s. Kolenbrander did not consider the Patriots revolutionaries at all, but he saw them as a collection of dilettantes who had illusory aims and were nostalgic for a bygone era. They did not truly revolutionize until after their defeat in 1787, when they were in France and they attended the so-called University of the Revolution with French revolutionaries as those tutors. So the conclusion to be drawn from Kolenbrander's work his works of 3 volumes, is that the Patriots were essentially un-Dutch, and that they were not part of Dutch revolution or Dutch history, so to speak. Needless to say, Gell took a relatively different view. He argued that the Patriot Revolution was a result of foreign influence, in this case French influence, but that the lower and middle classes in the Netherlands were excluded from any meaningful political participation. So that was the origins of the movement. And thus, it was a response to Dutch domestic affairs and thus essentially part of Dutch history. So the second publication, Gell reinforces his opposition to the dominant paradigm as put forward by Kolenbrander. And this is a detailed critique, which was just mentioned. And to me, in many ways, this is the classic Gell piece. The publication zooms in on about a dozen very specific aspects of Kolenbrander's work, which Gell then criticizes, so to deconstruct Kolenbrander's narrative completely and to sort of reinforce his own view of affairs. For instance, he accuses Kolenbrander of ignoring Dutch sources. He does not include these. He studies the Dutch Revolution based on German, English and French sources. He includes Dutch sources. And he accused him of selective reading and of bias. I think it's generally known that Kolenbrander actually had a tendency to use primary source material only insofar as it supports his own views, so the criticism is not without merit. Needless to say, it was a bit harsh, and I think perhaps a bit too harsh. I mean, openly brought into doubt Kolenbrander's academic professionalism at a time when he was no longer in a position to defend himself. He passed in 1955. Then again, I suppose that this feud fits into the broader feud or this academic clash between Kolenbrander and Gell. So I'd say that Gell's work with the Patriots has had a huge impact, and he successfully challenged the old narrative and replaced it with his own views, which presents the Patriot Revolution as an essential link in Dutch history, in the old regime, the latter parts of the post-1750 Dutch Republic and the forthcoming Belgian Revolution. And I think that Gell's views they remain dominant until this day. And it's fair to say that, in my opinion at least, critical academic historiography of the Patriot movement starts not with Kolenbrander but actually with Peter Gell. So the second topic I wanted to touch on was his work on the Batavians, the Batavian Revolution, which was the revolutionary turmoil of the 1790s. So he's published several pieces, several pieces have been published in his hands. The first publication is a monograph entitled La Révolution Batave, marketed to a French audience, and was actually published 5 years after Gel's passing. And it does not contain any original research in there, drawn again from his stump. Interestingly, the parts that dealt with the southern Low Countries are edited out, and so it's only deals exclusively with the Netherlands. I think this is surely quite contrary to Gel's conception of Greater Netherlands history. So Gel's views are best learned from a lecture he gave in 1956, and which was published no less than 5 times, including in English. In the study, Gel criticizes historians for not giving the Batavians due credit for their contribution to the establishment of the modern Netherlands. Special criticism was reserved for Colin Van for studying the Batavian Revolution only in relation to the French Revolution, as a consequence of which the Batavians seem quite incompetent. Affairs are quite dull. Gel argues that the Batavian Revolution was fundamentally different from the French Revolution due to the decentralized character of the Dutch Republic. And also, as a second point, due to the role played by the people in the revolution. Because the Netherlands lacked a central authority, Dutch Batavians could not direct their actions towards a central point. They needed to overthrow the old regime on a local level, and this was much more difficult. And whilst in France the people frequently intervened to set the French Revolution on its most radical course, in the Netherlands the people were largely excluded from the revolution. Only a small period of time, 6 months from January to June 1798, that the people actually intervened, and surprisingly enough this was the actual period in which most action was taken, namely the forced introduction of a constitution which unified the Netherlands politically, institutionally, fiscally, etc. So the conclusion to be drawn from Gel's study is that the Batavian Revolution deserves to be studied in its own right, and that the Batavians played an important role in constructing a Dutch state that was fit for the 19th century. This first point, that the Batavian Revolution deserves to be studied in its own right, that remains undisputed until this day. The second point, that the Batavians played a crucial role in the state building and the nation formation of the Netherlands, I believe has been questioned of late, and I think there's 2 conflicting opinions. One is what men perhaps could call the Amsterdam School of Thought, Luc van Sas, Velema, perhaps Anne Jourdan as well, who continue to argue that the Batavians played the crucial role in the state formation of the Netherlands in the late 18th, early 19th century. On the other side, I suppose there's historians like De Velde from the University of Leiden, who also chaired Dutch history, who argue that the more important role was played by the restoration regime through maintaining the best bits of all the previous regimes, including the Batavians. Moving on to Napoleon. So I think that Gel's most important contribution to revolutionary Napoleonic studies is, of course, his monumental monograph, Napoleon from One Ghost. The problem with the study of Napoleon was that he had such a great influence in the course of history that historians could not reach a consensus on a historiographic representation of Napoleon. Napoleon has been represented as the savior of the French Revolution, but also as the destroyer of the French Revolution, the betrayer of the French Revolution, as an embodiment of the will of the people, but also as a dictator. He was admired, he was hated, he was idealized, and he was also vilified. This diversity of representation of Napoleon, so Gel argued, was a result of historians taking a teleological approach to studying Napoleon. They took a position on Napoleon, usually according to their present circumstances, then they rearranged their facts accordingly. Gel rejected this approach. He viewed history not, as we said today, as a debate without an end. And the aim of the historian should not be to pass judgments, but it should be to present facts. And the fact of the matter was that Napoleon's character was so complex that it could not be portrayed in a single representation. So Gell avoided the teleological pitfall by studying not Napoleon's impact on history as deduced from his actions, but historiographical representation. And as such, I think that Gell's monograph is unique in the historiography of Napoleon and Napoleonic studies. As regards to the historiographical impacts of Gell's monograph, however, I think that one must take a more complex review. If one goes by recent biographies of Napoleon, I think that one must conclude that Napoleon continues to divide historians as ever before, and that the opinion has not in any way been reconciled or merged into some consensus. And so one must conclude that Gell's example was not followed, and his monograph was not a turning point in that sense. That being said, almost without exception, Gell is referred to in studies on Napoleon, usually in the first pages, and usually in reference to revised ways of representing Napoleon in the past, only for historians then to present their own revised opinions and representations of Napoleon. So in a way, I suppose that Gell's monograph has become the starting point for studies of Napoleon. And it has become a disclaimer that allows historians to continue publishing their diverse views and their conflicting views on Napoleon. So even if historians have not adhered to Gell's methodology, then at least they adhere to his conception of history as a debate without an end. Some conclusions. I think that it's fair to say that Gell had a great impact on revolutionary Napoleonic studies. He re-evaluated the revolutionary of Dutch history and he restored both the patriots and the protagonists to their rightful place in the history of the Netherlands. His monograph on Napoleon is unique in its objectivity and remains a starting point for the study of history to this day. As regards to the nature of Gell's work, I think it's important, or I think see this as important, to remember that Gell was not only a historian but he was also a polemicist. According to Toynbee, Gell could not resist the temptation to seize any opportunity for having a fight in any kind of arena that offered itself. And I think that this certainly holds true for my field of study, where Conan Wanda was frequently on the receiving end of Gell's attack. I think that most of Gell's work in my field of study can be classed as polemic rather than as actual historical research. The archival basis of Gell's studies in revolutionary and Napoleonic history is quite narrow. In fact, only his stump is based on original archival research. But from his stump, he draws quite heavily for lectures and publications, usually in response to peers or historiographical developments. In reflecting on Gell's legacy, Lodewijk Rogier was his peer and former chair at the Catholic University of Nijmegen. He suggested that all polemical work, Gell's included, loses its value sooner or later, and for the simple reason that the ideas that are contested either become commonplace or they are rejected. I disagree. I think that Gell's his polemical work had a lasting impact because they served a broader aim. First, Gell's polemics allowed him to elaborate on his views and to update his research continuously. I think for that reason it is quite current and retains its relevancy relatively long. And I think also for that reason it offers the best insights into Gell's views and opinions. Second, his polemics ensured a lively interest in Gell's research and his field of study. I think that this was always one of his aims. He tried to draw interest towards him and towards his field of study. And third, Gell's polemical work also raised his profile as an academic and an international stature, which is what he aspired to. That being said, I do agree with Pauline that Gel's most valuable contribution to the world stock of intellectual capital was his constructive work. And I share Pauline's regret that Gel did not find the time to finish his history of the Dutch-speaking peoples. A final volume, which would have taken the history of the Low Countries up until the 1830s, I think would show invaluable to the historians of the Low Country, but also to historians of revolutionary history.